Hey everyone, I'm Ermysenigma, welcome back to my channel and welcome to Monster Analysis. Up for analysis today is Alex Bone. Even though he's the greatest safecracker of all time, Alex Bone is no stranger to prison. Nevertheless, his stays are always short since there's no lock that can resist Mr. Bone's skills. From time to time he even enjoys getting sent into the slammer, if only to see his old friends who always have the best stories. And so Alex Bone is the latest and newest team race monster, and he's a thunder monster. And so, as of the time recording this video, there are a total of 20 Thunder Legendary monsters, so I'm going to be comparing Alex Bone to the remaining monsters. And starting things off with power, he boasts a pretty impressive power of 30,498. This actually puts him in 5th place along other Thunder monsters. And I should mention that the stat alone, that stat is in 3rd place. It just so happens that there's 3 monsters, Thyra Griffin and Hydratilla, that happen to have a power of 3,509, and above them is Dr. Victor with a power of 3,531, so nonetheless it's still a really high power even though he's in 5th place. As for his life of 27,747, this puts him in 6th place. And lastly we have his all too familiar speed of 3,465, which puts him in 8th place, tied with quite a few Thunder monsters such as Voltic, ROFL, Tempest, Nexor, and Monster Device. So just speaking in terms of stats alone, he has pretty good stats. He has a high power, he has a pretty good life, and he has a really fast paced speed. And just by looking at stats, we can tell that this monster is meant to be an attacker. And as for his trait, he's immune to blind, which definitely helps out when you're facing off against Thunder monsters, because there's quite a few Thunder monsters that can actually blind you. Immunity to stun would have been a better trait because there's also plenty of Thunder monsters that can stun you, and not to mention that when you look at other elements, plenty of those monsters tend to have stun skills. And so with that out of the way, let's move on to skills. And before I start, I do need to mention that Social Point had some fun with this monster. A lot of the skills names of this monsters are actually based off members from the community. I imagine most of you won't be familiar with every single member, as most of them were taken from the forum, the Social Point forum, but there's also a nice handful that you'll actually recognize from Monster Wiki. And speaking of which, we have Tan the Wise, which if I'm not mistaken is actually the creator of Monster Wiki, and this skill actually deals heavy thunder damage to all enemies, heals by 30% and gains 50% stamina. So this skill is actually not that great. It deals 65 thunder based damage to a single enemy, so it's not even an AoE, and yes, it's nice that you gain 30% of your life and you gain stamina, but overall it's really nothing too amazing. 65 damage, that's good, but to be thunder based, so when you're going up against other thunder monsters, it's not going to help you out too much, and to only target a single enemy, it's really rather unfortunate that this skill wasn't an AoE, or wasn't special based, or that it doesn't do any more. Skills group 1 we're also going to skip because there's really nothing too interesting there, and so that moves us into skills group 2, Pain the Marshal. Deals moderate thunder damage, applies evasion to itself, requires cooldown. So this skill targets a single enemy dealing 45 thunder based damage, it costs 28 stamina and it has a 2-turn cooldown, and this skill gives you evasion. Evasion is essentially going to be the same thing as space time. So for the next turn, or 2 turns, probably for the next turn, I just realized that there's actually no icon indicating evasion. Even in the previous skills there was no icon indicating whatever status effect it applies, but basically evasion just means he's going to dodge whatever attacks the enemy may throw at him, which means if you happen to go first and use this skill and then you're facing an enemy Voltic can attack you endlessly. He can use all his stamina to attack you, you're going to be taking no damage. This doesn't however mean that status effects won't land. For example, you can still get frozen, you can still get possessed, you can still get stunned, you just take no damage. And this is a possible skill you may want to consider running. And next up we have Clackers Desertion. Deals very heavy thunder damage, Mayday's target requires cooldown. This skill deals 65 thunder based damage to a single enemy, it costs 31 stamina and it has a 2-turn cooldown. And so this skill is pretty powerful. 65 damage is strong. It actually heals as much as his ultimate skill, which is really strange. It also only targets a single enemy. And so the thing about this skill is that this skill does have the potential to one-hit an enemy monster, assuming you have some pretty high level runes. You'd probably need 2 level 7s, maybe a 7 and an 8, or maybe 8 and above. And so one thing I do like about this skill is that even if you don't manage to take out the enemy, at least they're going to be dazed, which means they're going to have 25% reduced damage output and 25% reduced accuracy. And considering this monster has a really high base power, I would recommend Clackers Desertion for sure. Next up in skill group 2 we have Contrived Outbreak. Deals very heavy special damage, 50% chance of stunning target, requires cooldown. And so here we have a special based attack that deals 60 damage to a single enemy monster, it costs 29 stamina and it has a 1-turn cooldown, and with this skill there's also a 50% chance to stun the enemy target. And so the thing with this skill, if we're talking about a level 100 Alex Bone versus a level 100 Voltic, you would actually need a level 8 and a level 9 strength rune to be able to one-hit Voltic. So not many players have access to those runes, which is really rather unfortunate. Keep in mind that Voltic does have hardened, meaning that 15% of the time status effects won't land, which is even worse considering you only have a 50% chance to stun. And especially considering when it's a Thunder Warrior most likely going to face a Voltic on defense, it is really unfortunate that this skill isn't stronger, or that it was at least a guaranteed chance to stun. Nonetheless, you're still probably going to want to run this skill. And thus that moves us into skills group 3, My Cellmate Hakataka. Deals moderate thunder damage to all enemies, applies evasion to itself, requires cooldown. So here we have an AoE version of the previous skill that applies evasion. It deals 30 thunder-based damage to all of the enemy monsters, it costs 35 stamina with a 3-turn cooldown. And honestly, this is a pretty solid skill. The fact that it's an AoE and the fact that you get evasion, which means you're protected from attacks for the next turn, that is really powerful, especially when you combine it with other skills, because this monster does have some pretty powerful AoEs, as well as the previous skills I talked about, the single skills that are 65 thunder-based damage and 60 special-based damage. And especially when you keep in mind that you will probably face a Voltic on defense. If your deny monster fails to deny Voltic, if you fail to take out Voltic, you definitely want to be sure to have evasion on you so you don't die. Next up is Pinheiro Max Authority, deals moderate special damage to enemies, 50% chance of stunning all targets, requires cooldown. And so here we have a special based AoE that deals 40 damage to all of the enemy monsters. That is pretty powerful actually. It has a 35 stamina cost with a 1-turn cooldown, which is actually pretty low, and a 50% chance of stunning all the targets. Now the thing about a 50% chance AoE is that probably it's not going to be landing. You're essentially flipping a coin to decide whether or not a monster is going to be immobilized. Actually the odds are a little bit worse, because first of all it's an AoE, which means it has a 90% accuracy. So first the skill actually needs to land, and once it lands, then there's a 50% chance to stun, which means that the enemy has a VIP trait. If it's hard and if it's tough, most likely it won't be landing at all. And so it's really unfortunate that this skill isn't a guaranteed stun, but still, if we just forget about that for a minute, the fact that it's still a 40 damage special based AoE, that's still pretty powerful in itself, even with a 1-turn cooldown. So you can consider the 50% chance to stun sort of as like icing on the cake. It's not very good icing, but it's still icing. And the last skill in skills group 3 is Hellfire's Furlough. Deals moderate special damage to all enemies, 50% chance of dazing all targets, requires cooldown. And so here we have a special based AoE that deals 45 damage to all of the enemy monsters, it costs 35 stamina, and it has a 1-turn cooldown. And so Hellfire is stronger than the previous skill, dealing 5 more damage. However, the trade-off is that you have a 50% chance to daze as opposed to a 50% chance to stun. And if you had to decide between a 50% chance to daze or stun, I imagine most players would go with the 50% chance to stun. But also keep in mind that this monster is meant to be an attacker, so you can make an argument that the 45 damage AoE is better than the 40 damage AoE, because we don't really care about that 50% chance to stun or that 50% chance to daze. And so anyways, with that being said, there's different ways to go about building a skill set for this monster. You could obviously go with the 2 AoEs, the 2 special based AoEs, because if you use them one after another, 40 damage and 45 damage, that is really powerful. That's pretty much going to knock out any enemy monsters. You could also run Hakataka and Hellfire, and most likely this will eliminate all enemy monsters except for the Thunder monster, because that Thunder damage will take reduced damage from your Thunder based AoE. Another viable skill set for Alex Bone would be to run your 2 powerful single target hits, Clackers Desertion and Contrived Outbreak. And this would probably be the most useful to you if you can actually one-hit the enemy monster. Or even if you can't one-hit the enemy monster, you could always use one of your evasion skills to deal initial damage on one monster, and then on the following turn take them out with one of your powerful skills. All in all, I wouldn't necessarily say there's the best skill set for this monster, because both different skill sets have their ups and downs. For example, if you go the AoE route, just keep in mind that they have a 90% accuracy, which means there's a greater chance to miss. If you go with the stronger skill route, keep in mind that they can only target one enemy, although they do have increased accuracy, so there's pros and cons to whatever skill set you run. And of course, if you're really unsure of what to do, you could always run a combination of the two. You could get one of the strong skills and one of these strong AoEs. But when you're deciding on a skill set, just try to consider what is the most likely skill you would do most times on the first turn. If your answer to that is that most likely you would use one of these strong skills to eliminate one of the enemy monsters, then just think about what you would do on the second turn, because if you do manage to eliminate one enemy monster, there's only 2 monsters left, and by the time it's your turn again, do you really need another strong skill, or do you better need an AoE? Like I said earlier, there's really no best ideal skill set, you really gotta just pick what works best for you. All in all, I wouldn't say this monster is really that great, especially at level 100. His one saving grace, however, is that he's a team race monster, meaning that most players are probably going to get him rank 3, which means they're going to get him at level 115. And at level 115, he becomes tremendously more powerful. Not just because his stats increase, but because a level 115 monster, actually any ranked up monster for that matter, when they fight a non-ranked up monster, or anyone that's ranked lower than them, for example 115 versus a 110 or a 105, their damage output is significantly greater. Meaning that if you have a level 115 Alex Bone and you fight a level 100 Voltic, you probably don't need high level runes. You can probably get away with a level 4 rune and a level 5 rune, and Contrived Outbreak is going to one-hit that Voltic. And thus for runes, I would recommend 2 strength runes and a speed rune, and if I absolutely had to give a recommended skill set, it would have to be Contrived Outbreak for sure. Clackers Desertion, I'm personally a fan of single target hits because I'd rather one-hit the enemy monster, I'd rather one-hit the main threat than try to AoE everyone. So both of these 2 powerful skills from skills group 2, and I'm sorry Marshall, as much as I love single target hits, I'd have to go with the AoE, my cellmate Hakataka. And as for the final skill, it is seriously a really tough decision between these 2 skills because I love the increased damage. 45 will deal significantly more than 40, but at the same time, you never know when that 50% chance to stun can come in handy. It may not work most of the time, but but you never know when it can save you, so my personal preference would be to pick Max Authority. And so yeah, that's gonna be it for this video. Honestly, this is probably one of my least favorite monsters. I love the fact that the skills are based off members of the community, but at the same time, I really wish they could have made a better monster with better skills. And with that being said, that is going to conclude this analysis. Like always, please let me know what you thought about the video and let me know what you think about this monster. Do you agree with me that he's not so good, or do you think he's better than I give him credit for? Please don't hesitate from sharing your opinion with me, especially if you disagree. I really look forward to reading all of your comments. And with that said, I'm Armor Gaming. Good luck on your Monster Legends adventures. Like always, remember to dream big and pursue your passions.